Every time we turn on our televisions, every time we listen to the radio, every time we open our mobile phones, tablets, computers, we can't help being struck by the amount of suffering that we see. And even if we were to completely avoid all forms of media and all of the news outlets, it would still be impossible to escape the knowledge of any suffering, because illness and death are universal. They affect everyone. It's been said that the capacity to reason and question is one of the things that makes human life different from animal behaviour. So seeking an answer to why is there suffering is a perfectly understandable question. Almost everyone alive, whether they're atheist, theist, agnostic, has at one point or another questioned why suffering happens. And suffering can be put into two different categories. Broadly speaking, suffering is either a result of human activity or it's a result of nature. And while it's still difficult for us to understand, most people I've spoken to about this subject are happier with the concept that humans cause suffering than they are with the idea that suffering is caused by nature. Everyone understands that humans have free will. We're free to choose to act in the way that we want to. God has given each one of us the opportunity to choose between right or wrong, between good and evil. We can choose what we want to do when we want to do it. So an automatic result of that is that humans can choose to act in a way that causes suffering for others or suffering for themselves. And although that's not easy to accept, it's easy for us to understand. When faced with a scenario or situation in which suffering has been caused by another human, we might ask, why did it happen? We might say that's not fair, but ultimately we accept it happens because some people choose to act in that way. Nobody would question and say, why did that person have the opportunity to act of their own choice? We accept that we have free will. We accept that we can choose to act in the way that we want to. And in James chapter 4, the apostle writes and explains that we are the source of many of the bad things that happen. What causes quarrels and what causes fights amongst you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and you do not have, so you murder. You covet and you cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. Wars, fights, along with so many of the other vectors of human suffering, come from our desires to satisfy ourselves. We have the ability to choose our actions, and unfortunately there are people in the world who choose to act in a way that causes massive suffering to those around them. Some of it is mild, some of it is things like unpleasant words, unkind actions, some of it is uncomprehendibly horrible, murders, tortures and worse. We know this, we accept this, and most of the time we don't question this. Humans are agents of free choice, humans have free will, and as a consequence of this, some choose to use their free will in a way that causes suffering to others. I think the harder question is when we consider suffering as a result of nature. We all accept that God created the universe and everything in it. People will spend hours and hours discussing quite how this happened, when this happened, the way it happened, but ultimately all Christians accept that God is the creator and sustainer of all life. Genesis 1 verse 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Psalm 33, by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, by the breath of his mouth all their host. He gathered the waters of the sea as a heap, he puts the deep in storehouses. We accept that we're mortal and therefore that we have to die. Our bodies age, illness and disease affects us all, and I think we accept that. Other aspects of nature seem harder to understand. We know that God created the world. We know that lots of suffering is a result of nature, natural disasters, so-called acts of God, as the insurance companies term it in their disclaimers of things they won't pay you for. So where does that lead us? It leads us to the conclusion that God causes suffering. So we're going to spend a little while exploring this and seeing if we can unpick this in order to reconcile it with our understanding of a loving God. Since the very earliest Christian commentators, there's been two main approaches taken to the problem of natural disasters. In Dale Stuffner's The Problem of Evil and Historical Theological Approach, very snappy, he writes, when such evils as disease or natural disasters are discussed, they are viewed as, and he gives two choices, God's judgment against sin, or Tertullian's penal sin. Tertullian was one of the early church fathers, or as ambassadors which direct us towards God, such as Basil the Great prefers not to call them evils, or as the result of the fallen world order. So historically, people have thought that natural disasters are either divine punishment for sin, or they're a product of a fallen world. But I don't think either of those approaches stand up to scrutiny. In Genesis, God did use a natural disaster as judgment. He used floodwaters. In Genesis 9, God said that he would never again judge the earth in such a way again. Genesis 9 verse 11, I establish my covenant with you that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. Yes, there are still floods, still some very, very large floods. But God has said he won't use floodwater as a judgment on the earth again. And there's other examples in the Old Testament where we can find God using natural disasters as punishment, either on his covenant community or on those responsible to his commandments. There were times of drought that caused suffering. There were people who were swallowed up by the earth, so earthquakes, landslips, holes opening up, all natural things used as divine punishment. And God takes responsibility for these. Isaiah 45 verse 5, I am the Lord, there is no other beside me, there is no God. I equip you, though you do not know me, that people may know from the rising of the sun and from the west that there is none beside me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. I form light and create darkness. I make well-being and create calamity. I am the Lord who does all these things. However, in Luke 13 we find Jesus teaching that not all who perish, either at the hand of others or by disasters, are being punished for sin. Luke 13 verse 2, and he answered them, do you think those Galileans were worse sinners than all the other Galileans because they suffered in this way? No, I tell you, but unless you repent, you will all likewise perish. Jesus explains that sometimes bad things happen. Sometimes those bad things are the results of man's actions. People who are the recipients of those actions aren't being punished. They're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Then in verse 4, all those 18 on whom the tower in Siloam fell and killed them, do you think they were worse offenders than all the others who lived in Jerusalem? No, I tell you, but unless you repent, you will all likewise perish. So in these two verses he explains the same sort of things. Sometimes bad things happen as a result of natural disaster. The people who suffer as a result aren't being punished, they're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And we find another example in John chapter 9. A man had been born blind. Jesus' disciples presumed that this man had suffered because of some sort of sin, whether it was of his own or from his parents. Verse 2, his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned, or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. The writer of the book of Ecclesiastes summarises it quite nicely. He says, it's the same for all of us, since the same events happen to the righteous and to the wicked, to the good and to the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As the good one is, so is the sinner, and he who swears as he who shuns an oath. Verse 11 of the same chapter again, I saw that all under the sun, the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor the bread to the wise, nor the riches to the intelligent, nor favour to those with knowledge, but time and chance happen to all of them. Things happen to the bad and to the good. The good don't always succeed, the bad don't always fall. Time and chance happens to everyone. Sometimes bad things happen for no reason whatsoever. And one final quotation on this point before we move on. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. So in these verses, Jesus teaches that God provides environmental benefits to both the just and the unjust. So the idea that natural disasters can be interpreted simply as a punishment for sin doesn't stand up for scrutiny. We need to appreciate that God has arranged certain natural weather patterns, various other things in nature for the benefit of everyone, including the wicked. As for the view that natural disasters are defects resulting from the fall which will be fixed up in the kingdom age, the Bible doesn't characterise them as the products of a fall or as flaws in their natural creation to be corrected. In fact, the opposite seems to be the case. The storms, the lightning, the hail, all natural processes that would have caused havoc for the Israelite farmers, they're presented to Job as expressions of God's power and glory. Job 38, who has cleft a channel for the torrents of rain and a way for the thunderbolt, to bring rain on the land where no man is, on the desert in which there is no man, to satisfy the waste and desolate land, and to make the ground sprout with grass? Has the rain a father, or who has begotten the drops of dew? From whose womb did the ice come forth? Other versions talk about hail. And who has given birth to the frost of heaven? And if we look into the earth's history, there doesn't seem to be a point where there is no suffering. In the news in the last few months, scientists had found bone cancer in bones that have been dated to be very, very significantly old. So suffering always seems to have taken place. Rather than post-fall defects, natural disasters are the products of laws which God initiated at the beginning of creation to govern the various dynamic features of the earth. The rain, the wind, the actions of the sun on the earth are all ordained by God. Natural disasters are simply extraordinary demonstrations of these systems acting in ways that they were designed. So where are we? We know that God created the universe and everything within it. We know that natural disasters are not punishments from an angry God. But we're still at a point where we can see natural disasters happening and suffering happening as a result. And we're asking ourselves, okay, why are those things taking place? Why do these natural disasters happen? Why are they necessary? I'm going to dispense with one common answer to this question. Some natural disasters that cause suffering are clearly the result of human mismanagement of the world's resources, deforestation, damaging the ozone layer, etc. Human action has definitely had an effect on the world, on the planet, but it's not the reason why all suffering as a result of natural processes takes place. So we can't use that as a get out of free card in terms of this get out of jail free card in terms of this argument. For thus says the Lord, who created the heavens, he is God, who formed the earth and made it. He established it. He did not create it to be empty. He formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is no other. So Isaiah tells us that God created the earth, God formed the earth in order for it to be inhabited. We know from science that to have a planet that can be inhabited, we need a whole variety of different factors to be present. Gleiser writes, complex multicellular life relies on too many planetary factors, even after clearing all the chemical roadblocks, to be common. For example, a large moon to stabilise the planetary axis tilt and hence the seasons, a magnetic field to shield off radiation, plate tectonics to remix surface and ocean chemistry that helps regulate CO2 levels, etc. McCurdy says the Earth benefits from the presence of plate tectonics, a process that acts like a global thermostat by repossessing greenhouse gases. Life on Earth benefits dramatically from a single large moon that produces exceptional tides and helps to stabilise the tilt of the Earth and the length of its days. Writing about finding life in space, Lane wrote, "We must look beyond the mere presence of water, so when scientists are looking for life in space, they're no longer just looking for planets that contain water. They're also looking for the presence of volcanoes, plate tectonics, and oxygen. In order to support life, a planet needs to have those things: a single large moon, a magnetic field, volcanoes, plate tectonics. All of them are necessary for life, and yet they are also significantly responsible for the Earth's natural disasters. The sun provides the energy for the Earth. It has to provide a near constant output in order to sustain life on the Earth. One consequence of that is that the sun emits massive amounts of ionising radiation. But the Earth has protection from that in the form of a magnetic field. Were it not for the two natural barriers that stand between the sun and the surface of the Earth, life itself would soon disappear. These two essential shields, the magnetosphere and just beneath it the gaseous atmosphere of the Earth, protect us from the full fury of the highly variable star with which we live. Without the protection of the magnetosphere, ionising radiation would destroy all life exposed at the Earth's surface. So what is it about our planet that means it has got a magnetic field and other planets in the solar system don't? How does Earth differ from all those other planets? Well, much of the core of the Earth is a liquid. A movement of the Earth's liquid interior create the magnetosphere, which allows life on Earth. What else does that do though? Well, one of the costs of this is that earthquakes and volcanoes exist, and they're both causes of suffering. So we almost have to kind of weigh up, what do we want? Do we want to be able to have life, or do we want a little bit of suffering from volcanoes, from earthquakes? The two go hand in hand together. Volcanoes are part of the Earth's carbon cycle. They regulate temperature, the carbon balance, so that life can survive and flourish. Volcanoes play a critical role in biogeochemical cycling. It's fair to say, in fact, that Earth's life as we know it might not exist without volcanic activity, says Lockwood and Hazlitt. The movements of the Earth's tectonic plates create earthquakes and tsunamis. It's also essential to life. In addition, it causes the weathering of rocks, which removes massive amounts of CO2 from the atmosphere, maintaining a life-promoting climate. Tropical storms bring significant environmental benefits. They prevent some of the largest earthquakes taking place by releasing plate tension in slow quakes. The moon's tides play a vital role in the marine ecology, yet they can combine with storm fronts or rain flooding to produce large-scale floods. For example, in Bangladesh in 1988, 122,000 kilometres squared was flooded in less than 48 hours after the moon's high tide combined with 3 or 4 days of rain. Increased rainfall in coastal areas from tropical cyclones, fixing of atmospheric nitrogen by thunderstorms, the germination of many native plants species resulting from bushfires, and the maintenance of the fertility of the basin soils due to river flooding are some of the positive impacts of extreme meteorological events. So even though natural disasters, so-called acts of God, do bring about suffering, without them we wouldn't have any life. I don't think there is a simple answer to the problem of suffering. There are things that we can look at that provide us with some answers, but we're always going to be tested by this question. There are some things we look at that we simply cannot answer. As one author puts it, in the end, we may not have ultimate solutions to life's problems. We may not know the whys and the wherefores, but just because we don't have an answer to suffering doesn't mean that we cannot have a response to it. Our response should be to work to alleviate suffering wherever possible and to live a life as well as we can. As Christians, we're called to do our best to alleviate suffering. We read part of Matthew 25 as an introduction. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. In the parable, Jesus commends the people who have helped those who are suffering, the people who are sick, the people who are naked or thirsty or hungry. And conversely, for the people who ignored the plight of the afflicted, Jesus said they didn't help him. The Apostle James tells us to help those who are in need. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. The people who needed most support at the time that James was writing were the people who had no income, the orphans, the widows. James exhorted his readers to support them in whatever way they could. Despite this, though, however much we work to alleviate suffering, we know that we're never going to completely succeed. There will always be suffering. Fortunately, we can look forward to a time when there will be no suffering, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. God has set a time when he will send Jesus back to the earth, a time when he will restore God's kingdom and make all things right. Revelation 21 verse 4 for our final quote. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. There's a great time to look forward to. We need to respond in the way that we can in the intervening time. Thank you.